There's an old story floating around the depths of some of the most mysterious parts of the internet about a man who, upon getting knocked unconscious, lives an entire lifespan in the span of a few moments. And it got me wondering, could this be possible? Or is this just a very intriguing urban legend? Coma or comatose? What do we know about this bizarre state of mind? Stay tuned, because in this video, you'll find out exactly what being in a coma is like for most people, how long some of the longest comas are that people have awoken from, and some of the most fascinating stories there are about this strange and odd state of mind. The story goes like this. My last semester at a certain college, I was assaulted by a football player for walking where he was trying to drive. Note, he was 325 pounds and I was 120 pounds. While unconscious on the ground, I lived a different life. I met a wonderful lady. She made my heart skip and my face red. I pursued her for months and dispatched a few jerk boyfriends before I finally won her over. After 2 years, we got married, and almost immediately she bore me a daughter. I had a great job and my wife didn't have to work outside of the house. When my daughter was 2, my wife bore me a son. My son was the joy of my life. I would walk into his room every morning before I left work and doted on him and my daughter. One day, while sitting on the couch, I noticed that the perspective of the lamp was odd, like inverted. It was still in 3D, but just wrong. I was transfixed. I couldn't look away from it. I stayed up all night staring at it. The next morning, I didn't go to work. Something was just not right about that lamp. I stopped eating. I left the couch only to use the bathroom at first. Soon I stopped that too, as I wasn't eating or drinking. I stared at the effing lamp for 3 days before my wife got really worried. She had someone come and try to talk to me. By this time, my cognizance was breaking up. My wife was freaking out. She took the kids to her mother's house just before I had my epiphany. The lamp is not real. This house is not real. My wife, my kids, none of that is real. The last 10 years of my life are not effing real. The lamp started to go wider and deeper. It was still in inverted dimensions. It took up my entire perspective and all I could see was red. I heard voices, screams, all kinds of weird noises, and I became aware of pain. A ton of pain. The first words I said were, "I'm missing teeth." I opened my eyes and I was laying on my back on the sidewalk, surrounded by people that I didn't know. Lots were freaking out. I was completely confused. At some point, a cop scooped me up, walked me across the sidewalk, threw me face down on the back of a cop car. I was still confused. I was taken to the hospital by the cop and given CT scans and stuff. I went through about 3 years of horrid depression. I was grieving the loss of my wife and children and dealing with the knowledge that they never existed. I was scared that I was going insane, as I would cry myself to sleep, hoping I would see her in my dreams. I never have, but sometimes I see my son, usually just a glimpse out of my peripheral vision. He's perpetually 5 years old, and I can never hear what he says. I think the most fascinating thing about researching and learning about comas is that every coma patient's experience can be so vastly different from one another. So just sit back and listen to how wild, different, and otherworldly some of these first-hand accounts from these coma patients are. You could wake up and have no control over your body. I was in a medically induced coma for 6 weeks. There were a handful of times that I distinctly remember where I woke up in my head. What was the experience like? It sucked. When I would wake up in my head, I had no idea as to what had happened, so I'm fully conscious. I know that I'm me, but I can't open my eyes, I can't move a muscle, and I can't speak. The first time this happened, it was terrifying. I started to panic for a minute there. I thought I might be dead. Then I realized that I was thinking, so that didn't seem right. I tried to move and I couldn't. I tried to speak and I couldn't. I tried to scream and I couldn't. I realized at that point that if I didn't calm myself down, that I would go crazy inside my own head and no one could help me. Though I was on ventilator, in my head I did deep breathing exercises. At that time, I think that I thought I was actually breathing. I listened to the clicking of the machines and tried to focus on those. Then I started counting the sound of something that seemed repetitive. That gave me enough focus until eventually I drifted off again. What does science say about comas? There are varying degrees of consciousness included in the blanket term coma. Coma is a deep state of prolonged unconsciousness in which a person cannot be awakened that can be caused by a variety of problems: traumatic head injury, stroke, brain tumor, drug or alcohol intoxication, or even an underlying illness such as diabetes or an infection. Being in a coma is seemingly being in a state of limbo with your consciousness, not awake and alert in this physical reality, not dead, and because there are no sleep-wake cycles or REM sleep in a coma, you're not dreaming either. It's very odd though, and makes you wonder, because even though the brain is not in dream sleep, for some patients, it is just like they've been dreaming the whole time. I was in a coma for 5 weeks due to meningococcal. I had a lot of dreams, most that I can still remember pretty clearly. you can definitely take in what is being said from the people around you. I was 12 at the time, 22 now, and my mother was reading Lord of the Rings to me while I was out. I had some pretty vivid Lord of the Rings related dreams, like eating some ice cubes under a bridge with Bilbo Baggins. When I woke up, it felt like I'd been gone a long time, but without knowing how long. From what I've seen from researching all the different stories from coma patients, most report that it's just complete darkness, or like waking up from a very long sleep where you don't remember anything at all that happened. And unfortunately, for many, even periods of time such as months or even years before or after the coma are completely blank too. The memories have been wiped. Some people even wake up as different people with different personalities, likes, interests, hopes, and dreams, which is quite frankly disturbing to loved ones, as the person you once knew no longer exists. One person with no recollection of the coma writes that there was literally nothing, just dead space, after an injury that caused them to break their neck and back, among other things. They had no memory of the crash, which took place on a Monday. My last memories of Sunday night. Between then and the time where they were awoken, there were no dreams, no hearing people, no trying to communicate, just lying there. For some, it's like being stuck in complete limbo, not quite dreaming, but not quite awake. I was in a traumatic car accident and was in a coma for about a week. It was a lot like being in that weird state between being asleep and being awake, where you're not quite sure what is real and what's a dream. This part is a little hard to describe, so hang with me. Interestingly, while I couldn't communicate with my family, occasionally I could hear things happening in the room. The only way I can really explain this is like when you're dreaming and there's a loud noise in the area you're sleeping. Sometimes your brain rationalizes the noise as part of the dream. Hallucinations in real life can blend for a while, even after the coma wears off. It's a common misconception that things suddenly go back to normal for patients once they're out of their coma. According to many people who've experienced comas, it's hard to tell reality from delusion once they've woken up. My coma hallucinations in my first week post-coma blend together, writes one survivor. I saw all sorts of bizarre things. Everything was scary but felt so real, even though it was surreal. Sometimes, although completely unresponsive to the outside world, coma patients can still hear everything that's going on around them. If a loved one is in a coma, family and friends aren't powerless. You can help take care of your loved one while they are in the hospital. It's important to visit with the person in a coma, talk to them, read to them, and play their favorite music. It's possible that someone in a coma might be able to hear what's going on, even if they seem unresponsive. Like this account. My uncle and my dad were in a terrible wreck when they were both about 19. My dad was out for about 6 to 7 hours and remembers nothing. My uncle was in a coma for 6 weeks. He said that he could hear every conversation, knew when people visited him, but he couldn't communicate or move a muscle. He can still recall conversations people had while visiting him. He said his greatest fear was that they would think he was dead and bury him. He was terrified because he couldn't react or communicate and didn't know what they would do with him. Then he woke up. He had some lifelong disabilities, but went on to become the VP at his company in Texas. Some people in a coma wake up into locked-in syndrome. Locked-in syndrome, like the name implies, is when a person is conscious but locked into their own body, completely paralyzed, only able to blink and move their eyes vertically. It's important to note, generally, most people do come out of a coma. Typically, a coma does not last for more than a few days or a couple weeks. In some rare cases, though, a person might stay in a coma for several weeks, months, or even years. Depending on what caused a person to go into a coma, some patients are able to return to their normal lives after leaving the hospital. But unlike what you might have seen on TV, the idea that someone suddenly wakes up from a coma and is normal again is far from reality. A person coming out of a coma will probably be confused and respond slowly. In some instances, a coma patient might need therapy to relearn basic tasks and functions, like tying their shoes, eating with a fork, or learning how to walk again. The dark side of recovering from a coma, as one person tells it. I had no idea where I was. I had no idea what had happened. Months later, I was still learning about who did or didn't visit, pray, call, ask. Finances were a total mess. Trust me, companies do not care. Massive debts and financial penalties. And it took me over 18 months to get a job after painful physical rehabilitation and explaining over and over and over that I was in a coma, not just not working. Although extremely rare, miraculously, some people have come out of a coma after 10, 15, and even 20 plus years. One of the more recent is Munira Abdullah, a woman from the United Arab Emirates who, aged 32 at the time, was seriously injured in a traffic accident in 1991. Then made a miraculous recovery in 2019 after emerging from a 27-year-long coma. Nearly all people who wake up from such extended times in a coma unfortunately lack the physical abilities they had previous to the coma due to muscle loss. This also includes the muscles in their mouth, making talking extremely difficult or impossible in most cases. Being comatose is a vivid illustration about the separation between your body and your consciousness. We tend to view ourselves as this body that we are in at this moment, but we truly are something greater than that. Consciousness is piloting our bodies, and what we are is our consciousness ultimately. Our bodies are merely the means for our consciousness to experience this gift called life. It's just another reminder that your perception of reality is created in your mind, and as much as it might appear like reality is happening somewhere outside of your body, this physical world you are experiencing in reality is in large part a product of your mind.